Welcome, greetings, one and all. Super Wednesdays here in the Holy Land, in the Holy Apple, on the Holy Hilltop, Tal Binyamin. We are on the 21st day of Cheshvan, the latter part of the month 5782. Our second part, with God's help, a class that we started last week. Don't worry, it's not that long. It's only 51 minutes. You'll make it. You could do it. Yeah. The title of our second class, One World Religion, ? One World Government, ? One World Currency, ? Conspiracy Theories, ? Okay. Last week, we looked into various modern day sources, looking, is there any truth to this global vision that many of us have heard, especially in the last couple of years, especially in the last year and a half. We saw various sources, especially Alice Bailey's book of New Age, printed in 1954, 68 years ago. We spoke about the Abrahamic house of worshiping in Abu Dhabi. We spoke about how by many Jews and Christians, some even, I don't know many, but some scholars, some Jewish scholars, Christians, look at Sukkot as a universal holiday. We pointed to a lot of connection between the nations of the world and the holiday of Sukkot. There's definitely a meeting place that is happening on the holiday of Sukkot. In fact, the last meeting place that will kick in between the Jewish people and the nations of the world will once again be on the holiday of Sukkot, as is written in the tractate of Avodah Zarah on page 3, when it talks about the end of days, that God will deliver reward to the Jewish people. When the nations get abreast of this, they will come and complain that it's not fair that the Jewish people receive the Torah. We want to receive a commandment and give us a chance, give us a second chance. Everybody wants a second chance. You know, you were arrested, you were in prison, you want a second chance. Okay, so God says, okay, everyone deserves a second chance. And God gives them which commandment? Commandment of Sukkot. Now, there's 613 commandments, friend. Why did God give them of all the commandments? He could have gave them 612. You know, like eat matzah on Passover. You know, that's a difficult one. You got to stick that. You know, you could choke to death. It's like maybe dangerous to their lives. But why Sukkot? Very simple. Because this meeting place occurs on the holiday of Sukkot. As we said, the meeting between the 70 nations fighting against Jerusalem, fighting against the Jewish people, occurs on the holiday of Sukkot. So it's Sukkot. So if it's Sukkot, Hashem says, why? You know what? It's the holiday of Sukkot. Here's a mitzvah. Take it. Take the mitzvah. Build a sukkah. And we all know the ending, that the Gentiles enter the sukkah, and then it's hot, and then they leave the sukkah, and they kick it down. And that is, that's all, folks. That's all she wrote. Didn't pass that test. Okay. Last but not least, last week we talked about there are two schools of thoughts. 70 bulls are brought, as the Talmud tells us in Tractate Sukkot 55b. 70 bulls are brought for the 70 nations, connected to the 70 nations. Question is it for their benefit, or is it detrimental to the 70 nations? That's the question. We saw an equal amount of thought that it's beneficial to the nations of the world, and we saw an equal amount of opinion that it is actually detrimental. It's detrimental when we look at the graph. We see that there is a decline. That is the only time in all of the Torah, in all of Jewish history, where a sacrifice during a holiday is brought instead of in a constant, in a static pattern, every day the same amount, here we have, for the first time ever, a decline. And that's not a good sign, because according to Torah thought, Jewish people are always going up. We're always moving up the ladder, not going down. So when we see a decline, that is a very bad omen. And that is why we saw many sources that point out the defeat, the decline, the destruction of the evil 70 nations. Once again, we're not talking about the righteous Gentiles that observe the 7 commandments of Noah and were accepted before 3 Jewish judges. We're not talking about them. Okay, part 2, let's go. If we're looking for the source of we always have to go back to the beginning, take it from the start. A couple is having trouble in their marriage, they say, we want to return to, the days of the first couple of days of our marriage. You always want to go back and start again. So let's start from the beginning. The holiday of Sukkot does not kick in, is not revealed in the desert when the Jewish people for 40 years were surrounded by 7 clouds of glory. That was not the first time, that was not the source of the holiday of Sukkot. It is even before the 40 years of the desert. Wow, I don't remember. Right. But you have to look, you have to put on your glasses, you have to put on your Jewish Torah glasses. In 3 places, we are told that the true source of the holiday of Sukkot, where is its roots? Abraham. Abraham represents the holiday of Sukkot. Why? 1 second. First of all, our sources. Our first source is the tractate, the Talmud, Bava Metzia 86, side B. Our second source is the words of our sages, Breshit Rabbah 48, chapter 48, paragraph 10. Third source is the Holy Zohar HaKadosh in the portion of Vayera, page 102, side B. We will see, very interesting. We talked about there's definitely a unification of the Jews and the non-Jewish world that is taking place on the holiday of Sukkot. There is no denying. The question is, what is the goal of this gathering? Is it to join in a new one-world religion? Is it to join or to perhaps be separated, like the war of the 70 nations against the Jewish people, against Jerusalem? They will be annihilated. So it's true they come together, the Jews and the Gentiles come together on Sukkot to either be united or annihilated. So we'll see. Abraham, he's our source. It's in this week's it was in last week's Parsha, in Parshat Vayera. We just read it 4 days ago. I know the Jewish memory is small, but if we go back 4 days, we read about this. It's exciting. Get excited. Abraham, he just had at the age of 99, agent 99. I'm not going to take my shoe and talk on my shoe. For those that got it, they got the joke. For those, too bad, that didn't. Okay, so Abraham's age of 99, he has his circumcision, and he loves having guests. So he goes outside, it's boiling outside, and he brings in 3 guests that he sees walking. They're really angels that are disguised as people. Now, Abraham, many people, Jews and Gentiles alike, cite that Abraham did not care who came to his house. His house was an open house to anybody, to all the world. Is that true or false? Well, if we could say that's true, we're really in trouble. Why? Because Abraham led the battle against idol worshiping. In fact, Abraham, we are told by our sages in Breshit Rabbah that Abraham had to take over one day in his father's store, Terach. Terach sold idols, and Abraham destroyed all of those idols. You know how much monetary damage Abraham did for his father? There's our expense of these idols. It takes a long time to build. He destroyed. Abraham, before this, he was incarcerated for 10 years because he went around the world fighting against the ideology of idol worshiping, foreign worshiping. So he paid a dear price, 10 years of his life in prison. Not only that, he was caught by the king, Nimrod, and he was thrown into the fire, and God saved him. Why? Because he went around breaking idols, breaking the chains. People were in chains, chains of foreign worship. That is the all-encompassing, all-loving Abraham? Folks, we're going to come up with the 1-2 punch. Abraham, last week's portion, Vayera, it says he sees these three guests and he says, here, please, I'm going to give you some water and wash your feet. Why is that? I mean, maybe they didn't change their socks for a couple of weeks. I don't know. But no, that's not why. Our sages tell us that Abraham saw that they had sand on their feet. That meant they worshipped. They worshipped the sand. Sand was their god. Now that might sound a little bit funny, but it's not. It's not funny at all. Because, you know, today there's a lot of worshipers of the sand on our feet. Because our sages tell us, what does sand represent on our feet? Many people believe that they are successful because of the fact that they are quick on their feet. They know a good deal and they run from one stock to the next stock. So feet, sand, represent a person's monetary situation. So therefore, this is prevalent today. We also bow down to the sand, to our feet, to our strength. Oh, we're so keen. We're so quick to make the deals, to cut the deals. That's what it represents. So Abraham says, before I could take care of you, my dear guests, first you have to separate yourselves from foreign worshiping. And then we could talk. That's punch number one. Abraham doesn't say, come as you are. No, you will remove idol worshiping from yourself if you want to come into my house, into my tent. That's punch number one. Punch number two, this is amazing. Abraham still did not accept and did not take care of his guests yet. What was the second test? The second test was that he had a special tree. It says in last week's Parsha, please sit under this tree. What is that tree? Abraham had a special tree. Amazing tree. This tree was like an X-ray machine. Any guest that came through Abraham's doors was checked, a second check, by the tree. If a person believed in God, the tree would give that person shade. The tree would open up, the leaves would open up and be on top of the head or heads of the people. However, if they still had a place in their heart or in their mind that they were still connected to idol worshiping, there would be no shade on the heads of idol worshippers. And therefore, Abraham would not take care of them until he removed the last vintage of idol foreign worshiping. And only then, after the water, remove the foreign worship from yourself. Step number one. Step number two, I want to check you out on my X-ray machine. See where you're holding. Only then did he take care. He gave them food and gave them drink and gave them a place to sleep. But not before that. Not before that. Now this is an amazing thing, because Abraham is making a separation here between good and bad. He's making a separation between the believers and the non-believers. Comes the Zohar, and it says an amazing thing. We know that we're familiar. A few portions ago, 4 before that, in the book of Genesis, the portion of Genesis, we read about another tree. Do anyone of us remember? You got it. Adam and Eve. The tree of knowledge of good and bad. Well, that's very interesting. Abraham, when he has these guests, he also has a tree. So comes the Zohar and he hits it out. A grand slam. And he says to us that Abraham fixed the tree of knowledge, good and bad, because Adam became confused between good and bad. God told him, observe this commandment, do not partake in that tree. And he got confused and he fell. But Abraham did not fall. Abraham has his tree of knowledge that reveals to them who are the believers and who are the non-believers, who are the worshipers and who are foreign worshiping. So Abraham fixes the sin of Adam and Eve because Abraham understands to differentiate between good and bad. So folks, amazingly, Abraham represents the holiday of Sukkot. All the sources that I mentioned before say that in the merit of Abraham, we merited the holiday of Sukkot. Once again, this was at the time where Abraham checked his guests and he made a separation between good and bad, between worshiping and foreign worshiping. So that is exactly the idea of the holiday of Sukkot. That is the idea of the clouds of glory. Who was not in the clouds of glory? The Zohar tells us, and this is brought in hundreds of books, the Zohar tells us in the portion in the book of Exodus, portion of Ki Tisa, page 191, side B, he tells us that the multitudes of nations that left Egypt with the Jewish people, they were either 2 or 3 million of them. They outnumbered the Jewish people when the Jewish people left Egypt and bondage. For 40 years, the multitudes of nations that were converted by Moses without consulting God. God was upset. We are suffering till this very minute because of that. These multitudes of nations were not in the clouds of glory. And that is why we spoke a month ago. Why is there such an uproar? Why is there such an outcry not to have non-Jews in our Sukkah? Why is that? Very simple. Because the holiday of Sukkot, which we merited through the separation between evil and good by Abraham. Through Abraham, we merited the holiday of Sukkot. And just like he made a difference between good and bad, So too, the clouds of glory differentiated between the Jewish people and the multitudes of nations. It's the same exact concept. It's a separation. Okay. Now, we've seen so far, let's summarize. We've seen so far, there's two opinions. Are the 70 bulls, which are connected to the 70 nations, for their benefit or detrimental to them? We saw two opinions. We see that the source of the holiday of Sukkot comes from Abraham, who is able to fix the sin of Adam and Eve with the tree of knowledge, good and bad. Abraham is able to differentiate between good and bad, worshiping and foreign worshiping, and keeping it out. So, now, the third part of our class is that we will see that there is no discrepancy, there is no machloket, dispute between the two ideas. Okay, let's see. Answer number one. The 70 bulls. What are they for? Okay, our first is in the book, Biyam Derech, on the book of Deuteronomy, page 274. The sacrifices, the 70 sacrifices, were to bring out all of the good converts to Judaism from the 70 nations. Very simple. They were not to benefit the nations of the world. They were to benefit the Jewish people, the good of the nations who convert to Judaism. That is according to the Biyam Derech. Answer number two. We have Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. He writes in two different places. One, Likutei Mamarim, page 100, side B. Or Pri Tzadik, check it out, on the holiday of Shmini Atzeret, 33rd chapter. Listen closely. The Rab Tzadok said that after the sin of Adam and Eve, their souls, the sparks of their souls were scattered all over the world. That means they were also scattered amongst the nations. And Rav Tzadok says that because of the sin of Adam and Eve and their soul, their holy soul, being scattered all over the world, therefore we know that the reason why the Jewish people had to go into 4 different exiles, or 5, or some say 8 exiles, it was to gather up these sparks. There is something that originally was in the soul of Adam and Eve. We spoke many times that according to many sources, Adam and Eve were really Israel, and there were supposed to be no nations. There was just supposed to be the nation of Israel. Because of their sin, they came 70 nations. Now, so the Jewish people are scattered around the world. They're exiled out of the land of Israel. Why is that? Because of the fact that there are good qualities that were scattered from Adam and Eve all over to the nations. Every nation has a good point. Every nation has a good point about them. Rav Dessler in his Michtam Eliyahu, he goes in and he speaks about various countries and nations and what we learn from them. What we learn from them to integrate it back. It must be once again reunited to Judaism, to Torah. So it was scattered amongst the nations for the Jewish people. Jewish people once then are scattered in order to learn from their host countries a certain trait or traits that are really Jewish Torah traits, but were scattered because of the sin of Adam and Eve. So therefore, he says it's a double whammy, Rabbi Tzadok says. On one hand, the Jewish people, the 70 bulls represent that the Jewish people receive tremendous nourishment, we'll call it, spiritual nourishment of the good points of the 70 nations, which are once again really Jewish points and reunited within Jewish service of God. On the other hand, once the Jewish people have retrieved these good qualities of the nations have, so to speak, no more gas, no more fuel to continue. They are gone. Where do we see this very clearly? Our sages tell us that the Jewish people were able to leave Egypt only after they left Egypt totally demised. And we're not talking about physically. We're talking about they took all the good spiritual qualities of the Egyptians, integrated, assimilated into our worshiping of God, and there was nothing left of the Egyptians. That's why they were destroyed. So it's a double whammy. It's a positive. The 70 bulls are a positive for the Jewish people, integrating, absorbing the good parts of the nations. And on the other hand, for them it's detrimental. The 70 bulls are detrimental. That's why they're going down in numbers, 13, 12, etc., because they have no more strength to continue. Answer number 3. Rabbi Huberman, in his book Zev Yitraf on Psalms, page 339, he writes, there is no contradiction. Is it detrimental? Is it good? Is it bad for the nations? There is no contradiction. There are two periods of history. We have in Sukkot, we know it's divided, Sukkot holiday is divided into two. We have 7 days of Sukkot, and we have 1 day of Shmini Atzeret, or what they call today, Simchat Torah. So it's divided into two. These are actually 2 holidays. Okay, so Rabbi Huberman says the following. The 7 days of Sukkot represent the benefiting the nations of the world. Indeed, he writes, the 7 days of Sukkot, the 70 bulls which were sacrificed during this time, represents a period of history where the nations actually really did benefit from the Jewish people bringing these sacrifices to God on Sukkot. However, the 8th day of Sukkot, or the day of Shmini Atzeret, this represents the nations no longer benefiting from the sacrifices of the Jewish people. It's run out of energy. It's run out of electricity. The battery is dead of the nations. That is the 8th day. That represents the 8th day. Only the Jewish people and the good of the nations, those that observe the 7 commandments of Noah, only those are remaining. So there is no contradiction. The bulls are, on one hand, beneficial for a certain amount of history, and for a certain period of history, it turns around and they become detrimental to the nations of the world. It's just what part of history you're in. Answer number 4. The Ramchal, an amazing Ramchal. Listen to this one. In the 4th section, the 8th chapter, paragraph 2, the Ramchal in Derech Hashem, he explains, listen closely, very interesting. Holiday of Sukkot not only uplifts the Jewish people and separates the Jewish people from the nations, as we talked about Abraham, separation, the clouds of glory in the desert, separating between the Jews and the multitudes of nations. So the holiday of Sukkot is a holiday of uplifting the Jewish people and separating us from the nations. It also inflicts trepidation, fear, in the hearts and psyche of the nations of the world. By the fact that the Jewish people are sitting in the Sukkah, by the fact that the Jewish people take the 4 species, this, according to our sources, places the fear of God, of the Jewish people, in the hearts of the nations. Now the Ramchal says, this of course is dependent. If the Jewish people are perfecting themselves, then this this will work. This actually works. The nations will fear the Jewish people during Sukkot. But if we mess up and we continue in our old ways, and we do not perfect ourselves, after all the holidays, we had Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, we had Yom Kippur, and we're still sleeping, we go back to our old habits, our old bad ways, then it's not going to work. Or it works a little bit. Maybe every year a little bit pushes a little bit of fear into the nations of the world, of the Jewish people. But listen to this. Every year on Sukkot, once again, the Jewish people we have to be doing what we're supposed to be doing. But every year on Sukkot, the Ramchal says, spiritually, the nations of the world want to subjugate themselves because they fear the Jewish people. They see the truth of the Jewish people, the truth of the Torah. They want to subjugate themselves. They want to stop becoming many nations, many religions. They want to become one religion under the auspices of the Jewish people and them 7 nations, the 7 commandments of Noah. There are 2 religions in the world, dear friends. Only 2. One is Judaism and the other is the 7 commandments of Noah. There are no other religions in the world. You are either a Jew or a convert, or you are a righteous Gentile observing the religion of 7 commandments of Noah. There are no other religions. So this is an amazing thing. Ramchal is telling us, why do the bulls decrease? Every day there's one less. Why is that? This is not detrimental for the Gentiles. This is their saving grace. This is the key to surviving. If they stop becoming many beliefs, religions, and if they stop becoming many nations, and they start subjugating themselves and realizing that the Torah is true for them and is true for the Jewish people, if they join to become one with the Jewish people, under the banner of the Jewish people, under the umbrella of the Jewish people. Therefore, the Ramchal says, this in turn will not be detrimental to the nations of the world. The fact that they decrease, that is to their benefit, because that is what is going to happen. There are many religions, there are many nations, but as history goes, and we're coming close, it will come down to really a one world religion led by the Jewish people. Okay, answer number 5. According to the Orach Chaim HaKadosh on Pinchas, in Numbers, in the book of Numbers 29:13, he also similar says there are 2 stages of history. 70 bulls represent that any good of the 70 nations are to be absorbed into the Jewish people. When this process is finished, when all of the good that the 70 nations have from Adam and Eve and from the first days of the world, when this process is finished, only Israel and only the righteous Gentiles will remain. For all the good has been extracted from the nations, they are left naked. They are left they are destroyed. Answer number 6. Rabbi Shlomo Kluger in Imre Shefer on the portion of Pinchas, page 99. He says also, similarly, there is no contradiction. Rather, this is 2 phases of history. Phase number 1, listen closely. This is brilliant. When the Jews were independent and had the temple in Jerusalem, we brought the 70 sacrifices for the nations to atone for their sins, so God would not destroy the world. So according to Rabbi Kluger is telling us, or Shlomo Kluger is telling us, that the 70 nations, the 70 sacrifices, the bulls, this was to atone for the sins of the nations. Why? Because if we didn't atone for the sins of the nations, the world would be destroyed. If the world is destroyed, then what's happening to the Jewish people? The Jewish people are part of the world. They too will be destroyed. So this was to benefit the entire world, the Jewish people and also the non-Jews. Phase 2, says Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, the exile, the evil of the nations in general, the evil of the nations in general, and in particular against the Jewish people. There is no longer a temple. According to Rabbi Kluger, the benefit of the 70 bulls was intact, was a benefit for the nations and the Jewish people as long as the temple stood. But when the nations began to destroy the Jewish people, when the nations began to attack and be cruel to the Jewish people, when the nations themselves destroyed the temple, that is Rabbi Yochanan on Tractate Sukkot in the Talmud 55b. That's what he was saying. If they understood, once they destroyed the temple, once they started annihilating the Jewish people and going to war against the Jewish people and decrees against the Jewish people, spiritual, physical, they shot themselves in their foot. There is no longer that. They have no longer any protection from the 70 bulls. They created their own catastrophe, their own tragedy. It was caused by them. So these are the two parts of history. When the temple stood, it benefited the nations. When they destroyed the temple, when they started fighting against the Jewish people, instead of assisting the Jewish people, they destroyed themselves. And it's a process. And it's a process that's speeding up. They are all heading, all these evil nations are heading to the abyss. The bottom line, folks, we are heading to one world government. We are heading to one world religion. However, this is represented by the number 13. Yes, Alice Bailey, there is 13 principles in your book about the New World Order. There will be a New World Order. There will be one world religion, one world government. It will be led by the Jewish people and the righteous Gentiles that stuck by the 7 principles of Noah. 13 for us is the greatest of numbers. It is our heaven, is our world to come. 13 for the evil is the unlucky 13. It is the downfall of the nations. They know why 13 is unlucky. Deep down in their souls, they know it. We will shortly, today we should see a one world government, a one world religion led by the holy Jewish people and the holy nations, the holy Gentiles that observe the 7 commandments of Noah, going up to Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple today.